Hello everybody. So today I have a video for configuring LDAP using OpenLDAP on a Red Hat 7.6 server. I had a video out for this before, but due to the prompt size and coloring, I had received a couple complaints about it being hard to read. So hopefully this will be a little easier to follow. I will have a couple links in the description of this video, one for another video I did about configuring bind DNS on a Red Hat 7.6 server, because you'll at least need to know what your DNS server is. If you don't have a DNS server, you should have one configured, so you can follow that if you want to. The second one will be just a text document containing all of the steps that we're about to go over in this video, so you can use that as well. So before we get started with configuring LDAP, we'll need to confirm our IP address. So you can run ifconfig-a. You can also run hostname-i, and that will give you just the IP address of your Ethernet adapter. So we will use that to check to see if there's a DNS record for this IP address, and it comes back with the server's fully qualified domain name, and we'll just check that as well to confirm both forward and reverse lookup. As you can see, we're actually on the DNS server. I don't know about in a production environment if you'd want to put the LDAP server on your DNS server, but this is a lab, so I don't really care. The second thing we'll need to check is whether or not SE Linux is enabled, and you can do that with SE status. It says disabled. If it says enabled, you'll need to disable it. So I guess the second thing I'll point out is that I'm currently logged in as root, so all of the commands that I'll be running will not require sudo. If you are not logged in as root, you can switch to root with su-, or you can just run sudo before each command. So just for example, to disable SE Linux, you can do sudo set enforce 0. If you're logged in as root, you can just run set enforce 0. The second thing we'll do is update the SE Linux configuration file so that it's disabled on boot. So you can go vi etc se linux config, and then the line that says se linux equals enforcing, change enforcing to disabled. Then you can hit escape, right quit, exit, and you'll have to reboot your server. So the reason we are disabling SE Linux is I have noticed a couple times that when configuring LDAP, if SE Linux is enabled, the slapd service will fail to start. And if you check journal XE, it says that it failed to start because SE Linux was enabled. So this should just prevent that error from occurring when you're trying to configure your OpenLDAP server. So now that we've gone through and done that, we can install OpenLDAP. So you can run yum install -y OpenLDAP star to get all of the OpenLDAP tools, and then migration tools. And we'll just let that install. Okay, so before you go any further, just double check the output of your installation and make sure that there's no errors reported. If there's any errors that could result in files and folders not being created, which means you won't be able to configure your LDAP server. So just make sure everything installed correctly, and if it did, you can proceed on to the next step. We will need to create a encrypted password for our bind account for LDAP. So to do that, you can run slap and then password, and enter in a password. and it will output something like this. Just copy it and store it somewhere because you're going to need that in a second. The installation should have created a slapd directory, so cd etc OpenLDAP slapd.d and then cn equals config. And it contains the following files. We're going to only be modifying the last two files here. One thing to point out, because it's also going to come back in a later step, as you can see, the files are owned by user and group LDAP. This user was created as a part of the LDAP installation, so when that comes back in a couple seconds here, it will kind of make sense. But first thing we are going to do is make a copy of the original OLC database 1 monitor LDIF and the OLC database 2 HDB LDIF files. So we will modify the OLC database monitor file first, and you can open it with VI. The only thing we're changing in this file is your domain component values on the manager account. So for example, the domain for me is kjl.local, so I only have 2 domain component values. If your domain would be something like kjl.lab.local, you would have 3 domain component values, and that would look something like this. But if you only have the 2, like I do, it would be like this. I just want to point that out because the more period values, I guess, you have in your domain, so for each separated name, you would have a domain component value. So just wanted to point that out because it's important for the configuration. So you'll put whatever your domain is, and then that's pretty much it for this file. You can hit escape, :WQ, ! And now we will modify the second file. And we are more or less just doing the same thing here as well. There's the OLC suffix line. And also the root distinguish name. We are changing the DC values here as well. And then we are going to add one called OLC root PW. And this is where we are going to put that encrypted password that we copied. And once you've done that, you can save the file. And let me check my notes. Okay, so once you've modified those 2 files, you can test it with slap-test-u. And you're going to get these 2 checksum errors on the files that we modified, and that's only because we've modified them. You should get config file testing succeeded, in which case you can start slapd. So we'll do systemctl start slapd. And if there's no issues, it should just the prompt should just return like it did there. But you can also check with systemctl status slapd. And as you can see, it's running. The last message is just that it started. It looks like the only real error here no db config file found. I don't think I have IPv6 even configured on this server. Either way, I wouldn't be too concerned. This db_config file will actually be adding to var lib LDAP in a second, so you can ignore that as well. If the service comes up and you haven't had any issues so far, you can run systemctl enable slapd, and that will ensure that it comes up when you reboot the system. Okay, so now we are going to copy the db_config example to the var lib LDAP db_config file, and that will resolve the startup error. So cp user share OpenLDAP dash servers db_config.example and var lib LDAP db_config. So just to kind of point out what I was talking about before with the users, if we list the contents of that directory, we can see that they are also, or the files here are also owned by user and group LDAP, except for the db_config that we just copied. Its user and group ownership are the account that we're in, which is root. So to change that, you can run chown-r and then LDAP:LDAP to change both the user and group to LDAP. And then I am just going to do this. Everything else there is already set, so that's fine. If we do ls again, everything is now owned by LDAP for both the user and group. So next thing what we'll be doing is adding the schemas to our LDAP configuration. So you can run LDAP add -y in all capitals external -h LDAP I : 3// -f etc OpenLDAP schema cosine.ldif, and you should get basically this output. We'll do the same thing, and all we need to change is this to NIS, and then one more time with inet org person. Okay, so now we will change directories to the migration tools directory. That's under user share migration tools, and it has the following files. We will be only modifying the migrate_common.ph, so we'll make a copy of that. And now we are going to open the file and scroll down until you see from $default_mail domain all the way down to $extended_schema = 0. There's 3 values here we're going to be changing. Change the default mail domain to your domain. As you can see, this time it's not DC values, you just put the domain. So again, for me that's kjl.local. And then we are changing the default_base, same thing. DC = your domain component values for each domain component. Then scroll down to where it says extended schema and change 0 to 1. And then we can save the file. And now we will need to create a base.ldif file. I'm going to put my files under root. You can put them wherever you want, but just make sure that when you're calling the files that you change the location in the commands that I run to wherever you've put the files. So this is a new file, so there's obviously nothing here. I'm just going to copy and paste what needs to be in the file. Like I said, there'll be a link in the description of this video to a text document. You can copy directly from there and paste into your file. Just make sure that when you copy and paste, it starts from this DN line here, because sometimes copy and paste will for some reason it seems to cut out some stuff sometimes. The only thing you'll need to change is the DC components here, the O options here. So again, just for each value in your domain, the DC here, the DC values on your manager account, the DC values on the organizational unit for your users, and the DC values on the organizational unit for your groups. Once you've done that, that's pretty much it. So yeah, just make sure that you've updated the domain component values for your domain. Everything in here that says KJL or local should be changed to whatever your domain is. So once you've done that, you can hit escape, right quit, exit. And now, just for the sake of adding users to LDAP, because I don't really have any users in this lab environment, I'm just going to, well, let's see, yeah, user add password, just create a couple users. And then you can do the same thing for groups, so we'll just do a bunch of generic groups. Something like that. And we will be adding these system user groups that we just created to LDAP. To do that, we can cat the password in group files, and we will be grepping to remove everything else that that we didn't create here. So to do that, we can run cat etc password, and then we will do a grep and some wildcards. Okay, so as you can see, these are the users that we've just created. We can do the same thing for the group file, and it does the same thing. So we will now need to migrate these system users into a LDIF file for both the users and groups. So to do that, we can run the migrate password.pl and migrate group.pl, which, let's see if this actually works. No. So we'll do the full path. And now specify the output file. So actually, I didn't create one, I don't think. Yeah, my mistake. We'll need to create the output file first. So we will do a root password file, and the same thing, root group. Okay, now we can go back. So specify the path to your root password file, and now we will be doing the same thing, but it's a users.ldif file, and I will go over that in a second. So we will also change this to migration tools migrate_group.pl, and then update this so that it is the group file and a group.ldif. Okay, so if we look at those files now, you'll see that the users are basically all of their information for LDAP has been added to them. And if you do the same thing for groups, same thing. All the LDAP information for those groups has been added. Now what we will be doing is adding the base users and groups LDIF files to our LDAP server. So again, we'll be doing LDAP add and it will ask you for the LDAP password. This is what you typed to create the encrypted password. It's not the encrypted password. And you should basically get output showing that whatever is in your LDIF file has been added to LDAP. So as you can see, it added the domain component, manager account, and the OUs for my users and groups. So now we can add the users and it added each of the users, and we can also do the groups. And there we go. So now that that has been added, we can even query LDAP to get a output for a specific entry. So for example, you could do LDAP search -x UID equals and then a username and then -b and the base DN. So DC equals KJL, DC equals local. And there we go. So LDAP is now listing this user as a LDAP user. And you can do the same thing for a group. Just change UID to CN and then have it equal one of your group names. And there we go, one of the LDAP groups. So the last thing that you'll want to do if your firewall is enabled, you can check with systemctl status firewall D - running. Create a firewall rule to allow the LDAP service through. So you can do firewall cmd --permanent --zone equals public --add service equals LDAP, and then do a reload. And now LDAP should be allowed through your firewall. So I will do another video for adding a LDAP client and most likely managing LDAP, like the users and groups, once they've already been imported. This video is mostly just for installing and doing your basic configuration to start with. So if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. And as always, I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.